The scent of onions hitting hot oil was the first trumpet call of the evening. In the small, steam-fogged kitchen of 47 Willow Creek Lane, Elena Vargas stood at the stove, the sizzle of familiar percussion to the symphony of a weeknight. Outside, the autumn light was fading, painting the modest suburban street in long, melancholy shadows. Inside, the light was warm, butter yellow, and fought a valiant battle against the encroaching dusk. This was the hinge of the day, the noisy, chaotic, beautiful moment when the family, scattered by school and work and life, began to fold back into the shape of a home. "Abuela, did you add the comino?" Mateo, 16 and suddenly a foot taller than everyone, peered over his grandmother's shoulder, his phone momentarily forgotten in his hand. "Since before you were a thought in the universe, mijo," Elena replied, not turning, her wooden spoon making steady, sure circles in the pot of black beans that had been simmering since noon. The smell was deep, earthy, a promise of warmth. "Your great-grandmother Rosa taught me the beans must talk to the garlic and the cumin is the peacemaker. Now, set the table and call your sister. She's been in her cave for an hour." Upstairs, in a room plastered with posters of constellations and indie bands, Sophia, 14, was staring at a math worksheet as if it were written in a hostile alien language. The numbers blurred, the whispers from the school hallway that afternoon, "Did you see her shoes?" echoed louder than any algebra formula. She heard her brother's bellow, "Sophia, food!" and felt a surge of both relief and resentment. Relief for the interruption, resentment that the noisy, normal world downstairs demanded her participation when she felt anything but normal. In the living room, Carlos, Elena's son and Sophia and Mateo's father, was just walking through the door, the scent of cold air and copy paper clinging to his worn suit jacket. His shoulders carried the weight of a dozen stalled projects and a manager who saw diligence as an opportunity for more work. He dropped his briefcase with a thud that was part exhaustion, part punctuation. "I'm home," he called, the phrase less an announcement and more a sigh of return. "Welcome to the circus," Elena smiled as he kissed her cheek. "How is the lion's den?" "The lions are demanding longer hours and cheaper feed," Carlos mumbled, rolling up his sleeves. "What can I do?" "Grab the rice and tell your daughter her abuela's cooking waits for no GPA." The table was a map of their lives, the good tablecloth with the faint, indelible stain from Mateo's third-grade glitter volcano experiment, Sophia's forgotten water glass from the morning, now holding a collection of colored pencils, the salt shaker with the cracked cap that only worked if you knew the precise twist. They assembled, Carlos doling out fluffy white rice, Mateo carrying the pot of beans like a sacred offering, Sophia slinking into her chair, and Elena bringing a plate of sliced avocados and a bowl of crispy fried plantains. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of serving spoons clinking and the quiet of first bites. The bean stew was more than food, it was a taste of continuity. Elena watched her grandchildren eat, her own mother's hands moving in her memory, hands that could soothe a fever, pleat a dumpling, and wring laundry clean on a stone, all with the same efficient grace. "So," Carlos began, the universal parent probe, "how was school?" Mateo launched into a convoluted story about a botched chemistry experiment that almost evacuated the lab. Carlos listened, nodding, asking questions, his weariness momentarily shelved. His eyes then turned to Sophia. "And you, mija?" Sophia shrugged, pushing a bean around her plate. "Fine." "Just fine?" Elena asked gently, her eyes missing mething. She saw the slight droop in her granddaughter's posture, the way she avoided eye contact. "It was just... whatever," Sophia muttered, the words tight. "Can I be excused? I have a ton of homework." Before anyone could answer, the doorbell rang. It was an unusual sound for a weekday evening. Carlos frowned, getting up. He opened the door to find a young woman on his porch, shivering slightly in a thin jacket. She was maybe in her early 20s, her face pale and etched with a fatigue that went beyond physical tiredness. Behind her, on the sidewalk, was a stroller with a bundle of blankets. "I'm so sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice barely a whisper. "My car, it just died. Right there." She gestured weakly to an ancient, rust-speckled sedan parked at the curb, its hood up like a gaping mouth. "My phone's dead too. I need to call a tow truck for my baby and me. Her eyes flickered toward the stroller, wide with a primal anxiety. Carlos's first instinct, born of long days and a protective shell, was caution. But then he saw her eyes, the same scared, determined look he'd seen in his wife's eyes years ago, when Sophia was a newborn and they'd been stranded in a rainstorm. He stepped back. "Come in, please, it's cold." The woman, who introduced herself as Anya, wheeled the stroller into the hallway. The family meal froze, a tableau of surprise. Sophia stared, her own problems shrinking in the face of this real, tangible distress. Matteo quickly stood and pulled out a chair. Elena was already moving toward the kitchen. "You sit," Elena commanded, not unkindly. "Carlos, you help with the phone. I'll make a new plate." Anya protested weakly, but Elena was already reheating beans and rice. Carlos handed her his phone and a charger. As Anya made a hushed, stressed call to a tow service, Elena placed a steaming bowl in front of her, along with a glass of water and a plate of plantains. "For the strength," Elena said simply. The smell of the food seemed to unlock something in Anya. She took a tentative bite, then another, eating with the focused intensity of someone who hadn't eaten a proper meal in too long. As she ate, she kept a hand on the stroller, rocking it gently. The baby, a little girl named Lily, slept on, oblivious. The tow truck would be an hour, the dispatcher had said, an hour in the strange, warm cocoon of a stranger's home. The initial awkwardness melted, warmed by the food and by Elena's quiet, non-prying presence. Carlos asked about her car. Matteo offered to look at the engine with his dad. "I watched a YouTube video." Sophia, drawn out of her shell by the sleeping baby, shyly asked if she could peek. Anya's face softened for the first time, showing the young woman beneath the worry as she pulled back the blanket to reveal a perfect rosebud mouth and a fist curled near a cheek. "She's beautiful," Sophia breathed, and in that moment her own social anxieties seemed distant, trivial. Anya told them, in fragments, that she was moving to a cheaper apartment a town over, that she worked nights as a cleaner, that Lily's father wasn't in the picture. Her life was a tightrope walk over a canyon of uncertainty. The car was everything. Carlos listened, and an idea, impulsive and unbidden, formed. When Anya finished her meal, thanking them profusely, he stood up. "I'll be right back," he said, and disappeared into the bedroom. He returned with 5 $100 bills from the rainy day fund he and his wife had painstakingly built, a fund for emergencies, for a broken appliance, for a surprise bill. This felt like an emergency. He folded the bills and pressed them into Anya's hand as she was putting on her jacket. "For the tow and whatever else it needs," he said, closing her fingers over the money. Her eyes filled with shocked tears. She tried to refuse, but Carlos shook his head. "For Lily," he said, his voice gruff. "Let us be your good luck tonight." Anya was crying in earnest now, silent tears of overwhelming relief. She hugged Elena, shook Carlos's hand, thanked the kids. When the tow truck's yellow lights finally flashed outside, she left, promising to pay them back, her step lighter than when she had arrived. The door closed, leaving a sudden quiet. The family drifted back to the cooling remains of their dinner. A strange, buoyant feeling filled the room, a mixture of happiness and nervousness. They had just given away a significant amount of money they couldn't truly spare. "Well," Carlos said, sitting down heavily, "I hope the mechanic is honest." "She'll be okay," Elena said, clearing Anya's plate. "You saw her spirit. She is strong, like my mother was strong." Sophia looked at her father, really looked at him. The lines of stress were still there, but they seemed different now, etched not just by worry, but by purpose. "That was really cool, Dad," she said quietly. Matteo nodded. "Yeah, that was solid." They finished cleaning up in a companionable silence, the event binding them together in a new way. The story of Anya became part of the family lore, told and retold in the following days with a sense of shared pride. They wondered about her, hoped she was safe. A week later, Carlos was driving home from a particularly frustrating day. His own car was making a new, ominous clicking sound. As he stopped at a red light near the bustling town center, his eye caught a commotion. There, outside the modest storefront of Maria's Bridal and Alterations, was a small crowd, and in the center, surrounded by 2 police officers, was Anya. Carlos's heart plummeted. A cold wave of disappointment and self-recrimination washed over him. Oh no, what did we do? Was it a scam? Did she use the money for what? The cynicism of his daily grind rushed back. He'd been a fool. The light turned green, but he couldn't move. He watched, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Then he saw Anya's face. She wasn't looking down in shame. She was smiling, talking animatedly to the police. One officer was writing in a notepad, the other was smiling back. And then Carlos saw the sign freshly painted on the window of the shop. Lily's Stitch and Mend, Alterations and Repairs. Below, in smaller letters, a fresh start, 1 stitch at a time. Anya was pointing to the sign, then to the officers' uniforms. One officer had a neatly torn seam on his sleeve. The other was nodding. Anya gestured inside the shop, and the officers followed her in. It wasn't an arrest, it was business. Carlos drove the rest of the way home in a daze, but now the daze was of wonder. He burst through the front door, the story tumbling out of him before he even took off his coat. The family gathered around, listening in stunned, joyous silence. "Used the money for the deposit," Carlos concluded in awe in his voice. "She told the officers she could fix their uniforms. She's starting her own business, sewing. She said it was the one thing she was always good at." The kitchen, filled with the evening's new cooking smells, Elena was making sopa de fideo, seemed to glow brighter. Sophia's eyes were wide. She did it! She really did it! That night, the meal felt like a celebration. The simple noodle soup tasted like triumph. They talked not of lack, but of potential, of resilience. "Your great-grandmother Rosa," Elena said, stirring her soup. "She arrived in this country with a suitcase of clothes and a tin box of threads. She mended neighbors' clothes for a potato, for a loaf of bread. She built a life from a needle and thread. This girl, Anya, she has the same thread." The following month, on a crisp Saturday, the Vargas family took a trip to the town center. They found the shop. The bell tinkled as they entered. The small space was clean, bright, and filled with the hum of a sewing machine. Anya looked up and her face broke into a radiant smile. Lily was in a playpen nearby, gurgling at a mobile of fabric birds. "You came!" she exclaimed, rushing over. She refused to let them leave without taking Carlos's worn work blazer, which had a loose button, and Sophia's favorite jeans, which had a torn hem. "My first customers were the police," she laughed, her hands already deftly examining the blazer. "Now I have 3 officers who bring me their uniforms every month. It's a start." As she worked, she talked. She told them how the $500 had been the key that unlocked a door she'd been staring at for years. It paid for the deposit, for a business license, for a stack of flyers. The tow truck driver, it turned out, had a brother-in-law who was a cop. Word had spread. On the way home, with his mended work blazer and Sophia's perfectly hemmed jeans in a bag, Carlos felt a profound shift. The clicking in his car was still there. The worries about work hadn't vanished. Sophia would still face tough days at school. Mateo would still stress over college applications. But their story had grown a new, beautiful branch. They were no longer just a family weathering their own storms. They were a family who had become part of someone else's sunrise. They had witnessed the alchemy of a little help meeting immense courage. That evening, Elena started a new pot of beans. Sophia, without being asked, began setting the table. Mateo recounted the story of Anya's shop to his friend on the phone with palpable pride. Carlos watched them, the sounds of his family weaving around him, the chop of the knife, the clatter of plates, the easy laughter. The bean pot simmered on the stove, its scent a deep, earthy anchor. It was just a pot of beans, but it was also resilience in a pot. It was the patience of simmering, the faith in transformation, the knowledge that humble, everyday things, a shared meal, a small kindness, a whispered story, could sustain a soul, could bridge generations, could change a story's course. It wasn't about the money given or the success achieved, it was about the thread that connected them all. The giver, the receiver, the witness, a thread as strong as the one that had once mended a policeman's uniform and generations before had stitched a new life from a suitcase of dreams. In the end, they were all just keeping the pot simmering, passing the ladle, and making sure no one left the table hungry.